Apologize for my bit of a delay. I'm having some device issues this morning, but I think I'm all sorted out. Deputy Mayor Wilson is absent today, so I volunteered to chair today's meeting. So despite what it says on the agenda, I'm prepared to chair unless there's anybody out there who really wants to take the helm today. And if not, I will simply continue, call this meeting of Committee of the Whole to order for January 26th. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or other changes to be made to the agenda? If not, might I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda as presented? Councillor Journeau, thank you. All in favor? There are none opposed. That's carried. The minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of January 12th, 2021 have been circulated. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? Seeing none, might I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of January 12th, 2021 as presented? Councillor McGrath, thank you. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. We have a presentation this morning, standing presentation from the Emergency Coordination Center. Mr. Van Tighem, I see you standing by. Is this yours or is someone else taking that?
That would be me, Your Worship. Thank you very much, Mayor Ireland and Council. We have a short update for you this morning on the ECC activities. And as I think most of us are following numbers, we were aware that the numbers have been slowly decreasing in the province as far as total new cases per day, which is a very good thing. And recovered cases are up consistently as well in the last couple of weeks. Unfortunately, the sad news is that the number of deaths is still a considerable number and certainly very serious. Right now, there's presently 69 other ECCs activated within the province. And in Jasper right now, we presently have 4 active cases of COVID-19. The ECC continues to provide support and assistance to the community as requested or when required. Recently, we provided the Seton Healthcare Unit with another set of barricades, and this time it's for their screening entrance to help them to maintain a better secure area at the front door screening. Speaking with my colleagues at the Seton Center and the Evergreen Center, both centers are doing well. They've been out of the outbreak status for over a week now. And all the seniors in care and the pertinent staff in all 3 facilities have received their first dose. And that includes the Seton Healthcare Center, Pine Grove, as well as the Alpine Summit. Seton Healthcare does have the resources in place and the capacity in place to vaccinate large numbers once the vaccine is made available in those numbers. As we think most of us are aware, there has been a slowdown in the ability for us to receive the expected numbers of vaccine in Alberta and probably throughout Canada as well. But the anticipation is that that will be rectified and we will be back on track with being able to administer vaccines locally. There was, I think, around 20,000 doses that are expected to arrive in Alberta this week, and those will be earmarked to the seniors that have received the first dose, as well as the healthcare workers that have received their first dose. There's about a 42-day period between having your first and second dose to ensure that it's going to be effective. So it's important to get the second doses out. Once that's done, then the concentration will be on the senior population throughout the community and following the program that's in place and on the Alberta Health website. So just one other thing with speaking with the Seton was that they really want people to understand that it's still very important that if you are experiencing any symptoms at all, that you must contact Alberta Health through the website, and it's as simple as Googling Alberta Health COVID-19 and all the information's there, and get tested. And Jasper has the capacity and the testing trailer ready to go at any time. So just kind of get that out in the community again to ensure people that if they are experiencing any symptoms, to please get tested. The other thing that from the ECC is just our safety message and our mental health message, reminding everybody to keep your own safety and the safeties of others in mind while you're recreating in and around Jasper. I know that we are promoting that people get out and about and do things that are healthy in the outdoors, but a surprise trip to the hospital due to a preventable injury only adds to the burden of our healthcare, and that's something that we need to all work to make sure that doesn't happen. Keep within your limits, make smart choices, and we do seriously encourage people to get out there and do enjoy the great outdoors. Mental health is a concern at this time with a lot of people not being able to get out and a lot of other issues that are surrounded by COVID. So make sure you take some time to unwind and do things that you enjoy. Check in on your friends and family, talk with people that you trust about your own feelings, share your feelings with someone, and that helps as well. If you need to, reach out to local resources. There are supports through the Jasper Community Outreach Services, and there's outreach workers that are available Monday to Friday, 9 to 4:30, that can assist individuals. And that number to contact outreach workers or outreach services at Jasper Community Outreach Services is 780-852-2100. And again, you can find that on the internet by Googling or getting onto the Municipality of Jasper website. And just one last support, it's the Alberta Mental Health Helpline. It's something that's encouraged for people to, if you want to talk to someone, call the number. If you think you need some assistance, call the number. It's 1-877-303-2642. And again, that can be found by Googling Mental Health Helpline or Alberta Mental Health. And just in closing, the ECC is just reminding us as Jasper citizens, community members, that we must remain vigilant and continue to follow all the rules. Be patient with our visitors and with others. And if you do see something that is unsafe, bring it to the proper authorities and we'll have it dealt with in a proper fashion. Thank you very much, Your Worship and Council. If there's any questions, I would be more than happy to attempt to field them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Tighem. Any questions from councillors? I see none. That speaks highly of the conciseness of your report, Mr. Van Tighem, and the thoroughness, I suppose. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. If there is nothing else, we can move to agenda item 6, business arising from the minutes of January 12th. Is there any business arising other than boards and committees and Skatepark budget, which we have? All right, we will go to agenda item 6.1, boards and committees, and I will turn to Mr. Given. Are you presenting that or someone else in administration?
Thanks, Your Worship. I'll do a very brief introduction. Council is probably well aware that some work has happened previously on this issue, and so Ms. Nadon and Riddell are both here to be able to support the discussion if Council has any questions. Essentially, the report that's in front of you is looking for confirmation of direction and scope from Council. At a recent Council meeting, there was a discussion about reviews of boards and committees, and that is an item that is in Council's strategic priorities under Organizational Health Review and Evaluate Committee and Board roles, structures, and responsibilities. Administration is bringing forward a recommendation that Council approve a limited review of the following boards and committees: the Jasper Community Team, Community Conversations, the Environmental Responsibility Committee, and the Culture and Recreation Committee. And that the scope of the review be to provide recommendations on how to advance community engagement through greater consistency and role clarity on those committees. You'll see in the background of the report that there is an option, if Council wishes, to do a full review of all boards and committees. At this time, administration is recommending this more limited, prioritized review. and would suggest to council that we should be able to finish that review within current resources by June. A full review of all boards and committees would likely take until the fall of 2021, utilizing existing resources. So that's the introduction. I think the administrative team is happy to answer any questions that council may have, but we are looking for confirmation that this is a priority by a majority of council, and confirmation of the scope that the council would wish us to undertake in terms of a review. And I'll leave it there for questions or discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Councillor Demota.
Well, I want to thank Mr. Given for that. First of all, I couldn't help but think that you're sitting in the middle of a jet bridge, like the boarding tunnel going onto an airplane. It sounds like you're in a bit of a vacuum there. Anyway, it's quite interesting because the angle of where you're sitting from your desk certainly makes it feel that way. Directly to the topic, but the overall presentations for council today, I was just wondering if there was an intended tweak with the information packages that we got today, or is that just a coincidence? Because I was quite impressed by how the detail was delivered to us, and I just wanted to commend you and the directors on that.
Well, thanks for that, Councillor Demota. I'll say credit to the directors. They've done a fantastic job of putting together the reports. Council noticed that we're taking a little bit of a nuance, and you'll really see it in the next report with the way that we're asking for direction from you. But Ms. Nadon and all the report writers are doing a fantastic job, so full credit to them.
Thank you for that. Other questions for Mr. Given or administration generally? Go ahead, Councillor McGrath.
One thing with regards to boards and committees and in regards to the scope that we're looking for with this review, I'm not exactly sure how to reference what I exactly mean, but how when something comes up at a board or a committee, in what way should it get to council? So is that my role as an individual councillor appointed to that board? Is it the staff person's or the administration person's role? And I'm not sure how I would phrase that, but that's what I'm curious about with the boards that I sit on, how that information that gets discussed at the committee and the board level, if there's a council decision that needs to be made from it, or if it needs to come to council, should that come forward in councillor reports, or should that come forward by means of administration doing a report on it?
Your worship, I can respond to Councillor McGrath. Yeah, I think administration understood that that was one of the central challenges that council had been feeling. And we saw that as within the scope that we're recommending here when we talk about role clarity. And so providing some clarity on if there is input, suggestion, recommendation, what path that would take to coming to council, and ensuring that there is a clear, understood, and consistent approach to doing that. We would obviously be engaging council in this process as we made some recommendations, but the intent would be to clarify that for all parties involved.
Go ahead, Councillor McGrath.
And the only other thing I would request in line with that would be to build that into the orientation for the next council. I think it's taken me almost this long to figure out exactly how this flow works. And for some of my boards and committees, I'm still not even sure. So building that in the initial phases of council orientation would be excellent for the new council.
Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much, and thank you, Mr. Given, for bringing this forward. I'm also pleased with the scope of the review or the document in front of us. So I have a few thoughts. First is the question of scope. I am in support of not going forward with a full review of all boards and committees. I think we need to consider our language, and I think when we're talking about committees in this context, that we should be clear that we are talking about what I think we would refer to as advisory committees. So committees where council has chosen to create a specific avenue for public input. That's my personal view. I'm kind of looking to council to confirm that that's what we're talking about here. I find it difficult as soon as we begin to talk about boards and committees collectively, because our various boards and other kinds of organizations, and I think of, for example, the Jasper Housing Corporate, the Community Housing Corporation, I think of Evergreens, I think of the Waste Management, is that a board? They all have unique features, and it's very difficult to think about them in collectively because the structure of those groups need to be set up in a way that reflects the priorities of that group. So I think we should limit the scope to our advisory committees. So I'm absolutely in favor of that. I further think that part of the review should be to consider the scope or issues or areas within the community that we choose to have a committee. For example, the only active advisory committee really that we have right now with a specific area of scope would be the Culture and Recreation Committee. And so my question would be, well, why that? And not perhaps some other areas? And I'm wondering when any council last actually had the conversation about where in what realms of the community do we want to see an advisory committee? Or are we do we just sort of have the committees that we've always had? So if we're going to review them, I think we should ask ourselves, what are the committees that we should have? What are the areas within the community that we think we would like to see advice? The third thing I'd like to say is, while I don't want to anticipate outcomes, I find myself really quite strongly in favor of the community conversation model. I am an alternate on community conversation, so I don't attend a lot, but I am really impressed, continue to be and have been from the beginning, with the way that process works. I think what's missing there is exactly what Councillor McGrath referred to, is when good ideas come up, and they do, how are those ideas brought to council? I think when I sit on a board, I think I'm very clear that my role is to represent and be a liaison between council and the board. I'm not so sure, as Councillor McGrath said, what the councillor's role is. Is it the councillor's role to decide when and if to bring issues sort of up the ladder, so to speak, to council? So that's something that needs to be addressed. But I am highly impressed with the way the community conversations model works. I commend Mrs. Riddell for really working hard at fine-tuning the way that model works. I know that Mrs. Riddell has done some work in solidifying membership within the community conversation so that it's not as much of a sort of come and go as you wish scenario. And I think it should be looked at hard, and I think we should draw on positive experiences in the conversations. I'll remind council that one issue that came to us from community conversations was that of the free swim passes. And I thought that actually, while we stumbled around a little, I thought it actually worked really well. And we could look at that as an example of how it works, how it could and should work. So sorry for going on a bit, but those were the comments I had around that. And I only have one question, and that is, if the scope is to be limited to a review of existing advisory committees, I guess I'm wondering if it will take us until June, and if administration could clarify why we would need that many months for that more limited review. And if somebody could provide me with some thoughts on that timeline, I would appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, to Councillor Butler. You know, I will say at a high level, and I will turn to Christine for further detail. So Christine, you can be ready with that. But this is reflective of administration's current workload and current staffing levels. And so recognizing that there is still work going on with COVID response, and there are another number of other items that are not necessarily in front of council that are happening. But I will let Christine speak to the resourcing in her area and the demands that are there. I think it's reasonable that council understands that, and that's a good question. Ms. Nadon?
Thank you, Mr. Given. Your Worship, through to Councillor Butler, there is a brief outline of things that are happening within my department currently that affect our ability to take on any new tasks. But also, I've been working closely with Mrs. Riddell in ensuring that we build some consistency between the different boards. And I mean, the timeline was requested by Mr. Given to include in this report to give an idea to council, like what kind of resource allocation is involved with that request. It is an estimate, but due to the nature of working with another department and addressing our current needs, and I think it's clear to everyone that there's been lots of changes in our organizational structure in the last 6 months, particularly in legislative services and our interface with the CAO's office, and just a number of challenges, and not wanting to. I'm hoping that we can under promise and over deliver, but that is why we provided the timelines as they're outlined in the report.
Your
Go ahead,
worship.
Mr. Gibbon.
Yeah, and just to add to that, you know, to be more specific, council is aware that Ms. Nadon's recently received the appointment as returning officer for the municipal election. So she has a specific role there to ensure that all that coordination happens. I know as elected officials, there's one part of the election that you're focused on, administration is focused on another part of the election. And that is stuff that is another example of something that's happening behind the scenes. I think Ms. Nadon's exactly right. The intent here is to under-promise and over-deliver. This would be the maximum amount of time that administration at this stage feels that they need to be able to complete this project scope. You know, if there were other items that were, you know, made it unattainable within that timeline, we would of course let council know. And if it's able to be done prior to June, obviously we would attempt to do that. That would be our full intention.
Thank you for that. Councillor Demota, did I see your hand?
You did, but I'm okay to defer to Councillor Butler to probably finish up some of the line of questioning, because I'm probably going to go in a different direction. Okay, it must be cold over there because he's frozen.
Yep. Yeah. Councillor Butler, go ahead if you did have follow-up. I didn't realize that you did.
I did. Sorry, did I freeze up? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm not frozen. Thanks very much. I certainly accept that answer. And so I would just like to follow up and ask really council and administration if it is reasonable and if we would like to just slightly broaden the scope of the review to really ask the question whether we have the right mix of committees, whether there are committees that we are looking at that we don't need, or committees that we don't have, but that we might want to consider. And I don't want to burden what is already obviously a fairly heavy workload, but I'm just looking for some consensus on whether that is a piece that we should also consider in the scope of this review. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Gibbon, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Just in response to Councillor Butler, because he did address that to council and to administration. So I'll at least take the administrative view and confirm for council that we had intended discussion of the relevancy of these 3 different committees as a part of the review. So you should expect us to come back with some recommendations of the current status of the committee and whether it continues to be relevant, and if there may be a different way to do it with respect to these 3. I would not expect within this scope, unless council directs otherwise or adds, for administration to be coming up with recommendations of new committees that should be added. My suggestion would be that would be up to council to decide, through discussion, if there is a area of focus that isn't currently addressed that council wishes have addressed, then that would be a different discussion. I wouldn't expect administration to be making that recommendation to council, but certainly the relevancy and whether these committees continue to be a need in the community would be a part of the scope that administration was bringing forward today.
Thank you for that, Councillor Demota.
Yeah, and same as Councillor Butler, I don't feel that a full review is pertinent right now or an ideal use of our administrative resources at this time. I'm happy that the three are that are on the recommendations here for consideration, particularly the environmental responsibility one. And although not intended, as a counselor that's been appointed to this board, I feel like I've been part of a shell game, and again, not intentional, but you know that we embarked on this quite a long time ago, and I understand that COVID's taken place, but you know, we heard at first that we needed to go through the legislative committee, and here we are again contemplating the startup on this, and we need to get a terms of reference going for that if we want to decide that that's a worthwhile committee to have. And you know what, maybe if we can't get it going for this the end of this term, I understand our time's limited. You know, that could be something that we can have set up at least for the next council to have at least or review. The other item that I wanted to go over was the Culture and Rec Board, and I do understand where Councillor Butler was coming from with regards to committees and boards, but the Culture and Rec, I believe, is a board, and you know, you were making the distinction between the two, and I'm just wondering, for myself, being the rep for that board, council rep, we have a few other councillors that have been assigned to that board in the past, and I'd like to get some feedback from them on what's worked and what hasn't worked and what could be some improvements, because just because it's existed in the context that it has over years, I think that there might be room for some improvement, and conversations with some of the board members, I feel that, you know, some changes could be made, and I'm not sure if that's changing the board from a board to a committee, or you know, continuing as status quo. I don't know if anybody has any feedback.
Councillor McGrath and then Councillor Butler.
Thank you for that, and thanks for all of the shared perspectives today. I think that this review is super important, and I'm happy to go with the recommendation that administration has presented. I have one question, and it's something that I haven't really been able to figure out, because I sit on the JCTS, which is the not-for-profit arm that funds, augments, enhances what we do in the social sector in Jasper. And I see, and I don't know a lot about it because I haven't served on the Culture and Recreation Board yet, but I see the parallel to the JCTS and the what I believe is called the Friends of Jasper Culture and Recreation. I think it's a not-for-profit legally, but I don't know much about it, and I haven't heard much about it in the time that I've been a counselor. So I would almost request and like to add to this recommendation that the structure of the JCTS gets reviewed in comparison to the Friends of Jasper Culture and Recreation. I'm not sure the exact name of the organization or the society that's formed, because I believe there could be way better functioning. The grants that we receive for the social sector in town through the JCTS is absolutely astonishing. The work that we do as a board on the JCTS makes huge things happen in this community. And I believe that there's probably a missed piece with Culture and Rec being something that would be just as susceptible to amazing grants and funding coming through for the culture and recreation side of our community. But maybe it's being missed. Maybe it's because that not-for-profit isn't necessarily as active as it could be. And maybe the learnings from the JCTS could be applied to the Friends of Culture and Recreation, if there's any interest from council.
Again, I would suggest a question both for council and for administration. So to add that level of scope, I appreciate it. It's something that's just been suggested, Mr. Gibbon, so it might be difficult to formulate a quick response, but in terms of administrative capacity, and the timelines that have been suggested is an additional element of scope achievable at all from your perspective?
Well, Your Worship, to Councillor McGrath, her question, I would say that the discussion around the Friends of Culture and Recreation Society is certainly within the scope. I think that that's reasonable given the connection to the Culture and Rec Board, and helping provide some additional clarity as we identify in our recommendation. I would say that the Jasper Community Team Society, as Council knows, is a large part of the organization that's quite complex. And I would suggest that that would be an additional scope. If Council wished us to look at that, considering sort of the integration with service delivery in the municipality, I would suggest that that's a significant change in scope. I would like, if Council wanted us to consider what that might look like, I would like to have some time to come back to Council to discuss that type of a review of what the scope for that would look like, so we could give you a accurate estimation of timelines and workload and complexity with respect to JCTS, because it is significantly different. The report is here. If Council wishes to change scope, I guess the request, significantly change scope, I should say, the request would be that that Council ask administration to come back with estimations of what a change scope would take in terms of resourcing and timelines. That is completely possible, and that's why there are options that are available in the report. But if Council is coming up with an additional option that wasn't considered, I guess my request would be that we have some space to be able to come back to you with some recommendations on what that scope of work would entail in terms of resourcing.
Thank you, Mr. Given. I'll go back to Councillor McGrath for follow-up on that.
Thank you very much for your answer, Mr. Given. I would be totally satisfied with what you mentioned, that the Friends of the Culture and Recreation Society would be included in this level of the review as it's been recommended by administration. I think administration is well aware of the high functioning nature of the JCTS and the relation between the JCT and the JCTS. And I just think some learnings of the successes on the JCT and JCTS could be applied really laterally across the board to the Culture and Recreation Board and its relationship with the Friends of Jasper Culture and Recreation Society.
Thank you for that. Councillor Butler.
Thanks. Thanks for letting me speak again, but I guess that's what committee is for. It's a really interesting conversation, and I think a really important one, because it comes down to how we manage public engagement and how we create opportunities for public engagement. And I have a couple of things to respond to. One was Councillor Demota's point, where he pointed out rightly, I guess, that the Culture and Recreation Board is a board. And my response would be, well, should it be? I never think of it as a board. I think of a board as something with appointed or elected representatives which manage an organization in some way, or a group. But I guess we have some sort of a society. Do we? A Culture and Recreation Society, which I guess I was dimly aware of. But that's part of the question. Is it an advisory committee or is it a board? How should it function? If it's an advisory committee, as I said, I favor the community conversations model. But then that brings me to the question, well, if the question is the need for a group to apply through not-for-profit channels for funding, then the Jasper Community Team seems to be really, really good at that. And does it make sense that we have more than one body doing that, or could we not centralize that function within the Jasper Community Team Society, for example, or something very like it? Because there's every argument that anywhere we can be looking for not-for-profit grant funding and so on, it could be handled centrally, and that we maybe don't need more than one group to do that, and that what we need from a culture and recreation group is more sort of community input and advice, which just points to how difficult it may be to keep the scope of this review narrow. And then the other thing I wanted to respond to was Mr. Gibbons' point that if there was a need for other committees, it would be left to council. Yes, for council to consider, but I'll tell you, Mr. Gibbons, what I kind of have in the back of my mind, for example, is I know from conversations that I've had from time to time with members of the operations department that the ops department gets a lot of input from the community about everything from why didn't you plow my street to parking signage to the list is endless. I think the ops department gets a huge amount of input, and I think they do a really good job at responding to it. But at one point, if these expressions of concern from the community, I think it should be done this way, I think it should be done that way. If they come to questions of scope of service, then maybe there is an area where some sort of a body or process for those kind of concerns to be aired might be needed, because I think it's not fair at one point for administration to be fielding a lot of community input where they just, I mean, they have work to do, frankly. And also it's not really necessarily their job to address questions of scope of service. And they probably aren't always comfortable with that. So it might be an example of an area where administration might say, well, maybe we should have a process or body to look at some of those concerns. So that's sort of what I'm having in mind, and why I think it would be interesting to hear from administration if admin thinks there are some areas where we could use a group or a process. So just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Butler. Mr. Gibbon.
Well, Your Worship, on that specific point, I'll offer a view, and subject to reconsideration, in the future. But I guess I would suggest, as Councillor Butler acknowledged, that's not administration's role to be talking about level of service. I mean, the level of service is, as council's determined, and administration will deliver that service. So I'd suggest that, with respect, I suppose I'd suggest that there is a process and a body for that, and I'm looking at them right now. So, if residents do have a concern about level of service, that is exactly the kind of thing that, that's council's job, is to hear from the community about the level of service the community is receiving, and balance off service demands with, the community's sense around taxation levels, and to make those decisions through budget. So I would, respect that there may be a need for additional advisory committees in different service areas to provide specific advice. I completely agree with that. As Councillor Butler rightly noted, administration will deliver the service in accordance with the approved levels by council, and it's likely that council will continue to hear service requests and opinions, let's put it that way, from the general public, and we'll have to do the discernment and filtering of those as they choose what to bring forward to administration for direction. But all that said, we are certainly of the mind in administration that if council sees a need for a creation of a new body to gather input or to provide opinion to council on a specific focus area, we can enable that, as directed by council. So.
Thank you for that, Councillor Demota.
Thank you, sir. Well, yourself, as well as Councillor Journeau and Councillor Keller-Harampe, as far as I know, have all sat on the Culture and Rec Board at one time or another. And forgive me if anyone else has, and I'm missing out, whether Councillor Butler or Councillor McGrath have sat on there. Councillor Butler had referred to Committee of the Whole as our time for discussion on this, and he and I have often referred to Committee of the Whole as a spitballing session, and that was somewhat brought up at my last Culture and Rec Board meeting, because we only meet once a month, and then there was a discussion amongst members of the gap from month to month, and sometimes when there's a month missed completely due to lockdown or maybe time off in the summertime, there are large gaps when we discuss things, and then some things have either been dealt with or we lose momentum. And I brought up the idea of having an extra meeting a month, somewhat like our committee of the whole, where it isn't as official as our regular board meetings, but then we kind of have a committee style setup so that we can spitball on some of the issues and things that are coming from the community, like the outdoor skate rinks, that we can discuss and what we could do with those, bringing those up to council at the higher levels. And so those discussions have taken place, and I'm not sure whether your experiences on the Culture and Rec Board, how you feel about moving forward with something like that. And it's unfortunate, and I'm sorry if I'm long-winded. I was kind of hoping that someone from administration, as in Mrs. McNabb or Mrs. McNabb, I guess, to discuss what the possibilities of that, because I understand that, administration time has to be assigned to that, and what kind of workload we might be looking at before we go ahead with that and ask for recommendations from council that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DeBota. Councillor Journeau?
I just want to add to Councillor DeMota's comment. Councillor Wilson was the other councillor that sat on the rec board for 1 year.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Hempy.
I too agree with the partial review. Just sitting on the rec board, and I also sat back when we had the environmental committee in the old style. I have to say, again, at one time I sat on the outreach board, the community conversation, and I too found that very effective. A lot of people that attend those are from all different organizations, schools, that pertain to recreation, and I really like the idea of moving towards community conversations for both the environmental committee and the rec. I think it would really benefit both of those committees.
Thank you for that. I, at present, see no other hands. There's a couple of comments I wanted to make before we conclude. And once I have done so, I welcome others to comment further if they wish. Before we leave, I want to have some greater clarity on the scope that's intended. But I want to tie that into some procedural observations and perhaps some questions as well. So two issues in particular. Council has been requested at this meeting as committee of the whole to support a recommendation. And that in itself is a bit of a change of style, and I'm happy to accommodate that. It gives council an opportunity to better consider how it functions as a committee of the whole. So coming out of today's session, there is a request that as committee of the whole, we support a particular recommendation, which then would come back to council at our next regular meeting. And I wonder whether, particularly because there are some issues somewhat outstanding, whether the recommendation might be tempered a bit to say that committee of the whole supports the following recommendation in principle, to allow a bit of maneuverability for administration to fine tune with respect to some of these questions about scope in particular. Because in the next week or so, they might be able to flesh that out a little bit more and come back with a more nuanced recommendation, knowing that council wants to go in a particular direction in principle. The other more specific question I have is that in the background information, it says that administration is seeking direction on what level of priority council wishes to place on this review. We've talked about that generally in terms of timelines. But if we are going to talk about levels of priority, we should understand what those levels might be. And that could be a role of the report that comes back to us in the review. But every time we consider a request like this, we, I think, have a duty to be conscious of opportunity cost. And every time we direct administration to do anything, it means something else might be delayed or will be delayed. And so if we're talking about level of priority, should we not at some point set for ourselves some order of priority? Because the list will grow, and once or twice a month, we will give additional tasks to administration, and they can't all be level 1 priority. So we are going to have to sort ourselves out, and this is a priority item, but is it level 1? Is it level 2? Or what level will we attribute? And we don't need to answer that today. Maybe it becomes part of this review or a different review, but I recognize that every time we give direction, we necessarily are leaving a suggestion that something else might have to go by the wayside or at least be deferred. So I want us to be conscious of that. And then finally, I return to the question of scope. I agree with a lot of the comments that I heard, particularly from Councillor Butler and Councillor McGrath about additional scope, and particularly what committees we ought to have, whether we ought to have some general service level committee or something to relate more to the operations department. But it seems to me that nothing prevents council from engaging in those discussions at the committee of the whole in any event. So I welcome that discussion if any councillor wants to get it on the agenda for another committee of the whole meeting. I think that we would be well served to review the entire structure of our committees. And I have attempted often at the organizational committee to engage us in that discussion, but typically we just go with what we have. But I do agree that this would be an opportune time to reassess the committees that we have at the council level, because service levels do come back to council. And other communities, for example, have a budget committee, which we don't have, and people can do things in a variety of ways, and no one way is necessarily right, but we have an opportunity now to think about what we should leave for an incoming council. And I would welcome the opportunity to sit with council and assess our entire committee structure and rename those things that operate like advisory committees that are now called boards. And one is called a team, but it's neither a board nor a committee, but it's all there. And I think it seems to me to be fair game for discussion. Councillor Butler.
Well, thanks, Mayor Ireland, and I really like that suggestion. I will commit to bring that back to the future committee agenda to discuss, and to try to do so by offering some context, because I think it's a really important discussion. It goes right back to the conversation that Mr. Givens and I were kind of engaging in around the potential for some new committee, because it really comes down to a question of how does council want to receive input from the committee, from the community? Does council want to receive input from the community through committees or some committee-like process or processes, or not? If we take Mr. Givens' argument earlier about really it's just up to council whether, or Mr. Givens suggested that, well, the committee to receive input from the community is council. And if we take that argument at face value and take it to its sort of natural conclusion, if that's how we feel about it, then we don't need advisory committees, and we shouldn't have advisory committees. Our invitation to the community, if you have a thought or an idea or something you want to bring forward, is bring it to council. On the other hand, I think there are areas of ongoing and active conversation in the community where it's nice to think that maybe ideas would be fleshed out, bounced around among interested parties before they are brought to council, so that council has some sense that this isn't just, sort of one person's idea. It's an idea that has received some bashing around and some consideration and thinking from a group of interested and perhaps people with some knowledge in that field. And that is absolutely a question for council and not for administration to solve for. So yeah, let's do that. And that conversation going on concurrent with administration's review process, I think could only be helpful to the review process.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor McGrath?
The only thing I'd like to add for both council and for administration, given the conversations that have been had today on, you know, when you're engaging a community member and a community member has things to talk about, but maybe you're not sure where to point them, the community conversations are just that. So in community conversations, we might talk about something that's environmental. We might talk about something that's culture and recreation related, something that's operations related, or about recovery and resilience. It's all interwoven because these all affect the people in our community, and the people in our community is what the conversations that we have weekly at the community conversation table are about. So please keep that on your radar to invite community members. These are open meetings to the public, and it's a really helpful place that is already well functioning to have on the table and to have as an invite.
Thank you for that. Councillor Demota.
Thank you. And I think, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to lean on you a little bit, just, you know, specifically focusing on the Culture and Rec Board itself, because you were probably around during its conception. And I'm just wondering, you know, the relevance at the time of the Culture and Rec structure being designated as a board and the purpose that it served originally. And is it doing the same thing now, or is the need there for it to be structured as a board? You know, those are the kind of questions I had. Like, I'm just, for me, I'm having a hard time even being on the board, although it's only been a year, what the sole purpose of it and you know, what it actually does for the community and council as a board setup, and how that would be different than our other committees.
Well, thank you, Councillor Demota. You have confused me with my father, I believe, who was once upon a time chair of the Culture and Recreation Board. It seriously predates my tenure. It is a hangover from when we had a school board and they built an arena and managed a pool and things of that. The Culture and Recreation Board is very, very long-standing. But whether it is called a board or a committee, it serves more, I think, as an advisory committee, but was called a board, and that has never changed. But that will not prevent us from going back and reconsidering how it should be structured and named. But I appreciate the comment, but I'm not quite as old as you think I am.
I didn't know the board was that old, so I apologize. So thank you for the clarity on that. And, you know, just that corporate history really helps, regardless if it was passed down from your father or not. That does help. And I think that, you know, within this conversation, the relevance and the actual structure and the importance of it, you know, comes to light for the conversation. And I think it's definitely worth reviewing.
Thank you for that. Mr. Given.
Yes, Your Worship. Just, you know, I'll maybe go in reverse order from which they're raised. Yourself and Councillor Butler raised the question of sort of the overall council committee structure and council committee of the whole, potentially, and really that fundamental, let's say, in-house structure. These other bodies have public members of some type, and I guess that would be the distinction the observation that I'd make right now. The scope that we're talking about is these three specific entities that have public members. I think maybe as council and administration, we can have an offline discussion about the internal structure and the internal sort of process that council takes with committees. And I think that would be a good conversation that we could have offline. I wanted to address, Your Worship, your concerns about level of priority. I guess administration wouldn't imagine establishing a formalized priority list that is, level 1, level 2, level 3, because administration is putting 100% effort into any item that the council directs. I think you can see administration's suggestion about prioritization when it comes to timelines. If council decided something that was a high priority, wanted to increase the priority of something, then you could tell us, well, no, you know what, June is not going to do it. We need to have it next week. Well, if that's the case, that would signal to administration, this is a very high priority for council. Drop everything else and make sure we can do this in the next week. And so, we wouldn't imagine establishing a schedule of prioritization with different sort of measures, red, yellow, green, or something like that. I do have a suggestion for how council can understand the workload of administration and how council could adjust, I guess, would have more of an opportunity to express their opinion about relative priority of different items. And we can discuss that further again offline, a suggestion, I guess, to council to see if it's something that they have an interest in, but we may be able to adjust that. And then the final one, which was quite a while ago now, Your Worship, you brought up the recommendation. We are trying something slightly different. The wording is maybe a bit imprecise and slightly inconsistent between the two reports. But I think for this one, the recommendation would be that committee of the whole recommend council direct administration. So it's slightly, it seems a little bit unusual because it's all of you here in your role as council committee of the whole telling yourselves next week to do something. But the advantage to this process is that it does give that space of at least a week where this discussion now is out in the community through the media, where each of you have an opportunity to receive input, to consider the issue further before making a final determination next week. So I understand that maybe hasn't been exactly the process before, and the wording here is slightly different, but the wording that I would suggest would be that council committee of the whole recommend council direct administration, so on. We may find over time that council has a level of comfort of committee of the whole being able to direct administration on certain matters. This could be one of them, but as we're trying to establish a new process, maybe we're just better that we still go to council for that final approval. And in any case, I think the improvement here is that there is a specific motion arising and that it is voted on by committee of the whole. That will help administration immensely because it does clarify that there is at least enough support from a majority of council members. And it sounds like on this one, that there's pretty unanimous support. But there may be other issues in the future where there is not a majority of support, and it would be helpful to sort that out ahead of time. And by having specific motions that are voted on by council, it will give us a clear indication of yes, this is something that all of council or majority of council wants to have happen, or no, that was something that is the majority is not ready to expend resources on. So that's why we're asking for a motion, and in terms of that wording, committee recommend council.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. Councillor DeBona?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I do have a curveball to add to all this, and it does involve a little bit more of a workload, and that comes to the remuneration for the next council. And I just didn't want it to fall off the radar because 4 years ago we had a deadline, I believe, of the end of August, so August 31st or whatever it was, but because the nomination and campaign process has changed for this term, that timeline might be different. And although I don't feel that council remuneration should be an incentive for people running, one thing that did change the last time around was compensation for childcare, and that made a big difference in I think made a big difference in people that were running. And we do have a few councillors that have young families that wasn't common in the past. So I think that discussions like that will have to take place soon. Maybe we should set some goal lines and that would be probably HR and the CAO again. For some history on that, I'll keep it really short. We do have.
If I may,
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Councillor, I do apologize for interrupting, but I can see that very tangentially your comments might be related to the level of priority discussion regarding boards and committees. But I mean, yes. I would welcome this discussion later in the agenda under another topic. It doesn't seem to me fit very well with the boards and committee discussion that is before us. As I say, I can understand how it fits in with the question of priorities. But if I could just invite you perhaps to make those remarks again at a more suitable point in the agenda. Thank you for that. Councillor Kelleher-Empey.
I just want to follow up on that, Mayor Ireland. That has been assigned to Human Resources. The Human Resources Committee has agreed to bring back a recommendation within the early this year, and it is on the Human Resources agenda to review other municipalities and to come back at a later date.
Thank you for that. All right, I return to, I think it's agenda item 6.1 that we are on to see whether we can conclude this now. Mr. Given, thank you for your comments regarding changes to process and the work of the committee of the whole and your request for a motion. And I am prepared to put the question to committee of the whole, which would result in a motion. And typically we don't make motions in committee, but a motion to rise and report is always in order for a committee. So a committee can, in fact, choose to support making a particular recommendation to council at a future meeting. So I think it is procedurally appropriate. I just want to assure all of council that from my perspective, however one might vote with respect to a motion that the committee make a recommendation ought not to be seen as binding that councillor to vote in favor of the recommendation when it reaches council. Things can change. One of the reasons for this is public notice. So individual councillors and council generally may receive additional input from members of the public, or administration might find something out that changes views or opinions prior to the vote on the recommendation. So I want councillors to understand that by voting potentially in favor of a motion that the committee make a recommendation cannot be seen as binding a councillor to then vote in favor of the recommendation when it comes. So you still have latitude, but procedurally I understand how it does assist administration. And it also helps cover the notice provision to the public, which is always important to us. If there are no questions on those particular subjects, then I would invite a member of the committee to make a motion, and you can or cannot leave out the word principle, but that the committee of the whole support the following recommendation. And then as listed in the briefing note that we have, that is that council direct administration to conduct a review of the following boards and committees. That's the Jasper Community Team, Community Conversations, Environmental Responsibility, and Culture and Recreation. And that the review provide recommendations on how to advance community engagement through greater consistency and role clarity. So that is the request from administration for a motion. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go ahead and make that motion. The only proviso is I would prefer to use the word that correlates from our procedures bylaw, which is to adopt the recommendation. I think there's a slight difference, and I'd actually like to ask Mayor Ireland if you feel if that in fact reflects your intent. I think if committee of the whole adopts a recommendation, it is the same as supporting it, but perhaps just a little bit clearer. And using that word, I'm happy to make that.
And that is fine. And I confess that you have done more work on researching our procedural bylaw on this matter than did I, because I did none and I hadn't picked up that change of wording. But if your motion is that committee of the whole adopt the recommendation, which means it would adopt it as committee and present it, I think, to council as a recommendation at a subsequent meeting. I understand that, and procedurally that flows, so I'm content with that.
Okay, thank you.
So for administration, I see Ms. Nadon has her virtual hand up and Mr. Given had his real hand up, but I will turn to Ms. Nadon and her virtual hand.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I would defer to Mr. Given, but no, okay. I would suggest that this is a work in progress, as in we're trying to change the format of how administration receives direction from council, but also how council may advance specific items to regular meeting for voting on a matter that requires a council decision. So expending funds or approving projects or things of that nature. And what I get from Councillor Butler's recommendation, which is in line with the procedure bylaw, what that sounds like to me is direction. And that is what we are asking for from council at this time. So this decision does not require a formal council decision at a regular meeting. Mind you, in the interest of clarity and understanding, it could go that way. But council adopting the recommendation pending common understanding of what that means, to me means, yes, administration, go ahead and do the work as described in that motion. And that is what we are looking for. Versus something that would require a formal council decision, then the process would be more of that this recommendation gets advanced to the next regular meeting where council will then make a decision. And to your point, Mayor Ireland, earlier, that it's not because a councillor voted in favor of advancing the item to a regular meeting that this changes or forces them into a specific position in regards to the actual vote. So perhaps a valid conversation to have at this point. And if it's more comfortable for council and it makes sense to bring it forward at the next regular meeting to provide final direction to administration, we are fine with that. But also, if council were to adopt the recommendation today, I feel like we could go away and start putting the work towards it, and that would be, you wouldn't see it come back to council again until we were ready to report, is my understanding.
Thank you for that. Mr. Given, you had your hand up earlier and again, so I will turn to you first, and then Councillor Butler, I will recognize you following that.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, I concur with Ms. Nadon's, view there. I guess I would just say that, we will try to establish a practice of council's level of comfort with committee of the whole directing administration to undertake activities versus council directing administration to undertake activities. I would suggest that this, and there's nothing in the report that necessarily says this, that would give council this indication. And really, I think it's about us gaining a shared understanding. As Ms. Nadon says, this level of activity, this isn't requesting new funds. This is with existing resources. This isn't building a something or tendering a something. And so, it is something that council committee of the whole could direct administration to do, and without going to a council meeting. I think, and so I think we really are fine either way. If we are just trying to establish a pattern of sometimes there's this sort of this process of committee recommending up to council. The purpose here might just be to start to establish that process. We are fine either way. If council just wants to tell us to go away and do this, we can do that. If council would like to have that be an opportunity for some reflection, I guess, is what the other approach builds in. If council wants to say, hey, I just want to think about this before we tell you to go away and do it, then that's why you would recommend it forward to council next week. That would be the only distinction, and administration can work with either approach.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given, Councillor Butler, and then Councillor Demota.
Yeah, I almost feel I have to apologize for any members of the public watching this because their eyes are probably glazing over, but procedurally, it's a really good conversation to be having. So what I want to say is what they just said, what Mr. Givens just said, and that's actually why I asked to use the word adopt, because I think in this particular case, we're agreed that we're ready to send administration off to do some action, take some action that's not actually going to cost money or itself change direction. They will later come back maybe with some recommendations to change direction. So I think we can adopt the recommendation right here and right now, as opposed to supporting it and asking it that it then come back to a subsequent meeting for us to have the conversation again and redecide. So those points that were raised by Ms. Nadon and Mr. Given are exactly why I kind of got sticky and said, well, let's actually just let's adopt support. Let's adopt it. So for that.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Demota?
Yes, and just as a reminder, I brought it up before, something that may be directly linked to this is our public engagement policy, and by the MGA, our policy is outdated and by at least 2 years now. And I think that that needs to be reviewed and well, reviewed by council and renewed by council.
Thank you for that. All right, if I return then, we have a motion to adopt a recommendation before us. And the intent then, if we vote in favor of that motion to adopt, will be to leave administration with some direction with respect to boards and committees, those three at least, and come back with a report later, but not for a further direction from council convened as council. So with that understanding, if there is no further debate, I will call the question. All in favor? There are none opposed. So that is carried. So the recommendation has been adopted, Mr. Given, and that translates to direction. And that then allows us to move to agenda item 6.2, the skate park budget request, and presented in similar fashion, I guess, looking for a motion from council sitting as committee of the whole to provide, well, in this case, I guess, a recommendation to council, so distinct from the topic under boards and committees. In this one, looking for committee of the whole to support a recommendation to council for a decision next week on this topic. So with that understanding, Mr. Given, are you presenting this, or Mr. Greathead, or Mrs. Malinchuk, or all three?
Well, your worship, it is a team effort. It was a team effort putting together the report, and so there may be different members of the team that would speak to different sections or questions, and we'll refer those as needed, but I'll do the overall introduction. And just to speak to the process part, yes, your worship, the distinction here is that this is a commitment of new funds, and so I think by definition it needs to be approved by council, not by council committee of the whole. And so that's why the wording is such as it is, that the committee of the whole, you acting in this capacity here, would recommend this forward to the next council meeting for final approval. And as your worship said with the last item, support in moving it forward to council does not commit any council member to voting ultimately for it at council. You still have that ability to hear, gather input, and make decisions at that table with the benefit of any new information that's gained or perspective that's gained over the course of the week. So that's the process part aside. You will see the recommendation here based on the discussion previously at council. Administration was of the understanding that there was a desire to support the new skateboard park initiative, but that the municipality provide that support in a way that continued to encourage the community to support the initiative as well. And so you see a recommendation for up to $300,000 in matching funds for the new skateboard park, subject to additional funds or matching funds being secured from external sources. So basically that part of the motion sets the maximum amount that the municipality would be willing to support. If the project proponents rescope the project to a smaller amount or are unable to raise the total amount that they wish to, then the municipality's contribution, could change. But the maximum would never go over 300,000. And then there is an additional point there, and a recommendation that council allocate a portion of the land commonly known as Diamond A in Centennial Park for the construction of the skate park, as was sort of reflected in the discussion at that previous council meeting as well. I will say that administration has done preliminary investigation of the site at Diamond A. It does have the area that's needed. We have had a preliminary, Ms. McNabb has had a preliminary conversation with the skateboard park designers, the firm that had done the concept plan that I think council has seen previously and should be contained in the report. It is compatible, although may need to be adjusted. You will also see in the report from Ms. Malinchuk some information that we have gathered from the Skateboard Park Committee with respect to current contributions, external contributions towards the project. We've broken them apart in terms of ones that are sort of currently secured, sort of in the bank account, so to speak, ones that have been committed but are not necessarily yet in the bank account, and potential ones that the committee was working on, but again, are maybe just a little bit further down the line. And you can see that that total comes to about $400,000 in external funding, with the municipal funding of up to $300,000. Well, I mean, you can see the direction that's going. The organization would still need to be looking for additional funding through the Community Facility Enhancement Program or other sources to build out their full vision that has previously been presented. I understand that we do, I believe, still have on the line Mr. Savage from the committee, so he may be able to answer questions for council about the technical details of the project and sort of the status of the organization. But the report's here for council consideration and ultimately approval forward to council, so it could be finally approved next week. Obviously, this does have a budget implication, and so that's why I would need that formal council approval at a council meeting. With that, Your Worship, open for any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. 3 points probably. The first is to say that I really like the way this report is presented. I'm just very happy to see the way in which this was brought forward. And similar to the last piece that we discussed, I'm really happy with the way it is positioned, at what level of decision we're being asked to make today. So congratulations to all of those involved. I'm very happy with the first point. It is a suggestion that we talked about a week or two ago and that I have been in favor of for some time, that we position this as matching funds. I just want to underline that for the community to understand that part of our goal here, I think, is to incite contributions from the community. I'm slightly cautious on the second bullet. If we are recommending that we actually make that land allocation, or whether because we need time for the community to digest that conversation, maybe we're recommending that we consider allocating that portion. It is an alternative. It is not necessarily, I don't think, something that we're fully ready to get behind, though I think we all agree it's probably a good idea. My third point is this: that idea of using Ball Diamond A came up at a council meeting recently. I think I mentioned and almost regretted it for a reason I'll state, that, you know, is the current location the best? And are there other locations to consider? And then I think another councillor said, well, what about Ball Diamond A? But I want to give credit where credit is due. That idea to look at using Ball Diamond A came clearly and succinctly from the operations department, from Mr. Greathead, and my understanding, my memory, recollection of that conversation was this is something that the operations department collectively had been talking about and considered and were anxious and interested to get behind. And I think it's pretty important in this particular case for anyone to understand that that's where that idea came from. And I just want that noted, that it was first heard by council from Mr. Greathead. And I have a feeling that when it came up that we all sort of went, oh, you know, we had little light bulbs up like in comics. So it was important to me to just throw that onto the record. Thank you. And I'm in support of these recommendations.
Thank you. I'll allow Mr. Given to respond, and then I think in order I will recognize Councillor Demota and then Councillor McGrath.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just very briefly, I appreciate Councillor Butler recognizing Mr. Greathead and the operations team. Yes, absolutely, that's where that recommendation came from. It wasn't just an off-the-cuff comment at the last council meeting. And you'll see that contained in the report towards the end, where we actually specify why that recommendation came from Mr. Greathead and his team. There are underground utilities at the current site, and this would be construction on that current site would mean that there would be a risk of needing to demolish a portion of the skate park should those utilities ever fail. And so, or relocating those utilities in advance of construction of the new skate park. And that would add an additional at minimum, an additional $200,000 of cost. And so that was the advice from Mr. Greathead, the operations team. That's why council had heard the discussion about Diamond A, which wouldn't require any of those additional costs and wouldn't run the risk that there'd need to be utility repairs underneath the skateboard park at some future date. And so that's why the recommendation is as it is. And that's why council, I think, is familiar with that discussion from the operations perspective.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. Councillor Demota?
Well, before we keep going further down this rabbit hole, I would like to defer getting some information from Mr. Savage himself as the chair of the skate park committee and you know, kind of like the organizer behind all this and his take on the proposal that's in front of us and the work that's been done and what they perceive as the best plan for them in regards to what's the best route to go forward with this application, particularly to CFAP, if that's okay with the rest of council.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. I do see that Mr. Savage is there. I had earlier indicated that I would recognize Councillor McGrath, but Mr. Savage, you were invited to attend, and it is appropriate that if you have comments that we hear from you directly. So if you have something, please add your contribution now.
Okay, hi. Hopefully you can hear me. I got Bluetooth on right now, but yeah. So yeah, this came up to us. I heard it, the idea to move it to the Ball Diamond A. I heard some talk of this about was it last spring maybe or last summer, but yeah. So the skate park committee, we're supportive of the town's decisions collectively, because we know that they know more about what's going on underneath the ground and everything that we do, obviously, and whatever works well for them. But our concerns have to do with the getting the project done, because we're advocates for the skate park, and for, we're trying to represent, I guess, investors in the project and everything. So we want to do this in a timely manner and get it done, breaking ground by spring of 2022, should we win the CFEP grant. So we have some concerns. There have been, obviously public outlash, problems if that location, because there was in the past, there was certain things that were trying to be done there. So, with that, we have to take caution here. So we're just kind of, as advocates for the skate park and stuff, we just want to make sure that it gets done, by the time period we have allotted. So basically what we're going to do, we're working with the community, whatever they want to do. We're not, saying that we're against it, but what we want to do is, as writing this grant, and what we've been advised by CFEP, by New Line, was to go ahead with the grant application for CFEP and everything with our current location and design. And so we can work out the kinks with this, because we'll have obviously, until the spring of 2022 to really get everything worked out if we wanted to move the location. But for now, we're just going to go for the money from the grant, because that's the most important thing at this point. So what we want to do is, we're just going to go forward with what we have for now, and after that, we can figure that out as we go. If the town wants to move it, we're just going to work on getting the grant and doing that part of it. But if the town wants to go ahead and do all the other stuff, like move the land and figure out what the logistics are with the outlash from the community and stuff. But yeah, basically, if we win the grant, I believe we have like a year or something to complete the project, or a year and a half. So that's why we want to make sure it's built right away. And also with the building cost increase, it's like 6% a year is what New Line was informing us. So 1 year of building cost increase is already 60 grand. So it kind of makes sense to just get it done as soon as possible, if we can get that grant and just get her done. So yeah, that's there. I'm gonna have to talk to our committee, and I think we were gonna do a formal meeting with involved concerned people from the town with this possible relocation, just so that I can get my committee on board too, and we can address all the concerns. But it was basically the size. We wanted to keep the size of the skate park the same. We were worried about the public outlash or whatever from the surrounding areas, like the seniors lodge and people that would be involved, and also the time limit was basically what we had concerns about. But I'll end it there for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Savage. Councillor Demota.
Yeah, just on that, I know that Councillor McGrath was in queue, and I apologize if I'm jumping forward. I just do have a specific question for Mr. Savage, and I regret not asking it earlier, but because we're in a public meeting, it might be better here. With the grant writing, I haven't gone through the specifics entirely of the actual CFEP grant regulations there. Is it site specific as far as the grant goes, or is it something that if once achieved, can the discussion of moving it go? Because I do understand where you're coming from, and you have everything lined up. I think let's go forward with the existing grant application, and then if council decides that it should be in a different location, then that should come at the cost to the community or something like that.
Yeah, so you're right about that. So it doesn't really from what I understand from Trevor from New Line, we can write the grant for this location that we have currently, and we can change it later. It doesn't make a difference for CFEP. So that's not a concern. But yeah, like you said, basically we just want to go forward with it so that we can make sure that we secure the funding as soon as possible. And yeah, so that, yeah, it doesn't matter. We can review it later. From as far as I understand, that's what Trevor says. So and from what I understand from reading CFEP too, it shouldn't be a problem.
Thank you both for that. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. And thank you, administration, for the wonderful report that was presented to us today. It certainly captures the values that I have in relation to having the skate park accomplished and having the skate park get to this level of conversation where we can feel confident that it's going to be built for the children and the youth and the adults of Jasper. In relation to moving the skate park, my question has since almost been answered. It was about the skate park committee being consulted on that. I wasn't sure if they had known about this idea or if they had been properly consulted yet. So that's certainly really important, as I can remember back to my outreach days of sitting in community outreach services and the skate park committee gathering in the boardroom. And I think that's probably back to 2012. And they probably existed far beyond my tenure at community outreach. So they've been working on this for a very, very long time. And I want to make sure that they're honored in this process and the way that they should be, making sure that all of this is upfront and spoken of openly and honestly. I do have some concerns with the move of the skate park, mainly in relation to design costs. We all understand that when plans change, design costs go way up, and already the project is falling short of some needed funds. And I'm concerned that if we throw a really big change in there, that it could possibly become impossible to build, and that's a concern for me. And that comes back to my request at a previous council meeting where I did want to fund the entirety of the project, or ensure the skate park committee that this project will be built regardless of what comes in. That's my intention. I want to see it built regardless of whether CFAP comes in. There's amazing communities across Canada that deserve funds from the government, and I want to make sure that regardless of where CFAP goes with their decision making, that our community gets a skate park. I believe that $64,000 that is still missing from the equations listed on the report could possibly be added to the $300,000 so that we ensure the completion of this and we're not going back to the community members to seek additional funds. We have to remember that the funds that the municipality is providing is funds from the community members. This is their tax dollars. This is where they've expressed to me that they want their tax dollars spent, and they're already paying for it through their taxation. So they're already contributing. I'm not sure if they can continue to contribute more. The contributions that have already been presented are fabulous. They're amazing. They're big numbers. But do I want to put it on Mr. Savage's shoulders to come up with more? Not really. I think that's our responsibility. I think that's our responsibility as the politicians in this community to say, let's get it done. Let's get it built.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath, Councillor Butler, and then Councillor Demota.
Well, thanks very much. And thank you very much, Councillor McGrath. I respect and I understand the intent of your words, but I have to say, I cannot overstate how much I don't agree. I have to say, if I was a community funder looking at putting money into the skate park, and I knew that council would put up the money to get it built no matter what, the first thing I would do is withdraw my support, and I would put it somewhere else that I know that tax dollars wouldn't fill the gap. We have a responsibility to draw lines in terms of how much support we're willing to direct toward various areas. So I am certainly not comfortable with an open-ended commitment. I wouldn't be comfortable with that. But this, I wouldn't be comfortable with an open-ended commitment if it came to council for the conversation that we had last week on the idea of an outdoor skating rink. I will never be comfortable with any kind of open-ended commitment. I've been an advocate to come back to the question of taxation. I have been an advocate since last September of the concept of defining the tax envelope for the coming year. And it's another example of ways in which I think that we have to be willing to make the tough decisions and draw lines. One of the ways in which we know and can measure community support is by looking at the dollars flowing from the community. Of course, we can fund anything we want by just raising taxes, but I wouldn't find that to be a responsible way to go. And so that is why I was very specific when I suggested that we create a top line for our funding of $300,000, and that is quite a lot of money for one undertaking, and that we make that contingent on other funding sources. So I hate to be so blunt in opposition to those comments, but that's certainly.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Demota.
Well, and I certainly appreciate that, and I too have similar views. I've been a huge advocate and supporter of this initiative for quite a long time. And so having said that, I think that it would be nice to see some support from the community and council as far as earmarking some dollars go. You know, we're going through some tight times right now, and we've heard from, you know, our commercial sector, particularly the hospitality sector, that they're going to be facing even tougher times this year. And you know, we did some major, we took some major things into consideration last year with our budget, and we've heard from them now. And I don't think that this is the year to be, you know, putting tax dollars towards something like this. So we have to be a little bit more creative, and I do believe from the foundations 1 and 2 that are listed in the report here, that is a stipulation by them as far as what, how, and what they're willing to contribute, and they don't want the municipality to be a backstop. You know, so we're looking for a grassroots funding growth here, and I think that's the main idea behind this. I can't support even earmarking $300,000 for this project at this time because of the climate that we're in. So if it's going to be anything, maybe a third of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Demota. In the absence of other hands at the moment, I have a couple of questions. I'm sorry, Mr. Given, go ahead.
Thanks, Your Worship. Mr. Greathead has his hand up,
Oh.
His virtual hand for some time, and I think he may have an operations perspective. So I just want to make sure that he had that opportunity to express that from administration operations view.
Thank you for bringing that to my attention, and I apologize, Mr. Greathead.
No.
Your hand is up there staring me in the face, and I overlooked it. But please go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. And Mr. Savage, you know, I've only kind of know who you are. I've never actually had any interaction, but I would like to discuss the relocation to Ball Diamond A with you. I believe that there would be some significant cost savings were we to relocate the natural draw or the drop-in. Were we to do that, could use the natural elements that are already built in with the hill. I believe that this more visible location can offer an awful lot of community impact, and in a very, very beneficial way, as opposed to having it hidden and kind of it's wedged in between two buildings right now. So it's not really a flagship kind of piece of infrastructure that we're looking at. My biggest concern, though, is when we do this, I think we're going to have some significant construction costs that we could alleviate. We wouldn't have to be tearing out the old concrete and removing old concrete and disposing of the old concrete until we actually have a plan of what we're going to do with the existing site. We wouldn't have to relocate or ruggedize the utility lines that are running between the two buildings. So I do believe that there's an opportunity with the relocation as opposed to a hindrance or a roadblock. So I would really like to engage with the skate park committee and see where we can coordinate our activities and make sure that we're suiting both parties' needs on this. And that's all I would have to add to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead. While you are still there somewhere, I had a couple of questions about the second part of the proposed recommendation, and that is the change of venue from the current site to Diamond A. Firstly, for members of the public who might be watching, or for those who might watch later, can you just confirm which of the diamonds is Diamond A?
Your Worship, Diamond A is the diamond that abuts the new soccer pitch that was installed at Centennial Park. So it does not have adequate room to actually house a softball game. And currently, last year, operations removed the backstop and the fencing in the area. And this year, we had a request to put in some just temporary horseshoe pits. So you'll see the 8 wooden boxes there. We put in some horseshoe pits, and those can be relocated to pretty much anywhere, just picked up and dragged out. But that's the site that we're looking at.
Okay. Thank you. And then I take it then that because that site is virtually unused, it's not used for baseball in any event, or it's not baseball anymore, but slow pitch or fast pitch. We would not be disrupting other users of Centennial Park to any significant extent.
No, Your Worship, and it is pretty much an unusable space in any means. Currently, the way the configuration of the park is. So as Mr. Butler had pointed out, this is kind of a thought process that derived from the ops department. And we just see that as we're wondering what we can do with Ball Diamond Day. What would work, and then as this skate park initiative has really developed, and it's just initiated the conversation within our group. And that's why we ended up bringing it forward. We just feel that this could actually be like a flagship structure. Something that could, be very, very positive for the community, and utilizing pretty much a dead space.
All right, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you thinking ahead about other uses of land, but I do note that that then is the closest that you could get to Alpine Summit Senior Lodge, and have evenings that extend to 11 o'clock. I don't know what the parameters will be for skating at that park, what the noise level might be, but it just occurs to me that when we're dealing with land use issues, we have some duty to consult with the community, and the proposal to make a recommendation to council for decision next week on the change of venue, I think is far too quick. I think that this has to be subject to some sort of community engagement process. We took months and months to reconfigure an off-leash park. I cannot see that for a central location such as this that we can legitimately move within a week. But I leave that for council's consideration. But I think it is too quick a turnaround to contemplate making such a decision a week from now. I do have some other questions, but I'll come back to those. I see many hands up. So Mr. Given and then Councillor Butler.
Yes, Your Worship, just to speak specifically to that point about community consultation, administration is aware that extensive community consultation would be required, and council may wish to have that happen before the final determination. That's fine. I guess I would just, point out that there is a cost of not changing the site, and the community should be aware of that. That would be a central part of the conversation out in the community is about the relative merits and values of the different location, along with the different costs associated with the locations. And that's why administration is seeking some direction from council. If council chose to forward the recommendation as contained in the report today, there would be, of course, that week delay where we would likely hear something from the community. And if next week on consideration, council wished to direct administration to engage in a public engagement process around the site, we absolutely could do that. So council could take that part either direction. I guess I would just observe that if ultimately the decision is not to move to the site formerly known as Diamond A, then there is a direct financial consequence of that could impact the municipality's level of required contribution, or B, the community contribution that's required to go ahead with the project. So that's why there is, it is not a decision that could go either or. The direction that decision takes does have a direct financial impact to the project in one way or another. So just, I guess, would make that observation for council, and absolutely if council directed administration to partner with the Skateboard Association to undertake public engagement with respect to the Diamond A location, that's something that we could do for you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. Just so all those with hands up are aware, I have Councillor Butler, Mr. Savage, and Councillor Kelleher MP in that order. But if Councillor Butler chooses to defer to Mr. Savage, because I think his hand was up there and I missed it earlier, but I'd leave it. That seems fine. So Mr. Savage, I will call upon you first, and then Councillor Butler, and then Councillor Kelleher MP.
Okay, yeah, just kind of on my phone, so that's why I keep touching the screen. But my committee members just keep kind of sending me questions to ask. So basically, I'll just also bring up that I have a lot of confidence in Trevor Morgan and New Line Skateparks, that they know what they're doing. And, with the conversations that Trevor's having with Yvonne, I'm very, makes me feel good that they are having the conversations, because he, he's done this before and he'll know kind of the best route to go. So yeah, with that, but basically, with the public outcry, like that is one thing, I think one of our biggest concerns, just whether they're going to say no or not. But obviously that's going to take time to figure out. Also, what was the other one? It was, is there pipes underneath that location? I don't know. I mean, I know there's sprinkler systems and stuff, but as John Greathead said as well, it probably will be cheaper. I was thinking that too, and I was looking at the land features of the hill. It looks like you could fit a quarter pipe in there. But yeah, we just want to make sure it's the same size. And but yeah, it probably could be a lot cheaper there, because you wouldn't have to rip up the asphalt and stuff, and you could use that other area for something else. That's what sorry, I just got another message here. If the locals said no, would it still go forward, is one of the questions that we're wondering. But yeah, no, I'm pretty confident in you know, New Line and what they're doing. So I think there is one thing to consider is $200,000 for the utility upgrade might be, you know, something, but like I said, the construction costs, if this gets delayed, goes up 6% a year. And Trevor Morgan, that's why I'm trying to say that I trust in New Line, is because he actually said they could put the piping underneath parts of the skate park where, you know, like maybe there's no features, so it would be a minimal cost to get in there if they needed to. But I think that's all I really needed to say. Sorry for rambling on there.
Thank you for that, Mr. Savage. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. A couple of points. First, to Mayor Ireland's point around the timing. That's exactly why I am not comfortable with this recommendation unless we insert consideration of change of location. I think it's fair to signal to the community that we're considering that we're having the conversation, but there certainly needs to be some conversation around that. And then the second point is in response to something I heard earlier from Mr. Savage, and he mentioned again here, which is, you know, community feedback, concerns within the community. There are concerns and will be concerns within the community for any land use decision. Always, it never goes any other way, and we know that. And the point I really want to make is to provide a little comfort for Mr. Savage and his group, is that it's our job to deal with that and not your job to deal with that. If the land use decision is absolutely a decision of the municipality and council, and I don't think the skate park committee needs to own any piece of the question of whether it's the right use for that space. You're advocates for having a skate park in the community, and council has showed certainly some level of support for that. But the where of it, I would encourage your group to you know, really don't burden yourself too much with that question. It's a really important question, but it's our responsibility to deal with that, and we will. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Keller-Hrampe.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I'd just like to go back to the funding. I agree with Councillor Butler. I like the idea of up to 300,000. And I think an opportunity for our community to step in. The Alberta Treasury has a crowdfunding program, and it's like a GoFundMe. And the Community Futures office, West Yellowhead, is quite willing to work with the skateboard park to help them set up this program. And this would be an opportunity for all the community, whether it's $5, $2, to contribute to the skateboard park. And I think that would make it more of a community park.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Hrampe. Councillor Demota.
Just to clarify, I do believe that the committee already has a GoFundMe page. I don't know how those would work in correlation with each other, but definitely the more participation or ability for participation, the better. I do want to remind council that, you know, just on a quick ratio, because of the times we're in and the communication that we've been getting from members of the community, in particular, certain sector, that if we're talking about $300,000, at least 200,000 of that contribution with the tax split does come from the commercial sector. And just a reminder that if we're talking about committing $300,000, that we're in times right now where the affordability for that may be controversial. So again, I'm in favor of some level of support, but to that degree, I'm not sure.
Thank you for that. Before I turn to you, Councillor McGrath, again, Mr. Savage, I see your virtual hand up, but that may have remained up or may have got there by accident. So your hand is up and was up while Councillor Demota was speaking, but did you have something else to add?
No, I think it was just a mistake. But yeah, I do want to quickly just talk on that point about the funding and everything. So, you know, we are also like really, because like we're all taxpayers, so like that's kind of been one of my mission statements too with this whole skate park thing, is to try to do it as least of a cost as possible. But I think that's kind of where the onus lies on securing this CFEP grant this year, because we know that it's going to be available next year. So we just want to really get this one going on. So no matter what, just to be really clear, our number one concern is to make sure that we qualify for the 2021 CFEP grant and June 15th, 2021. And, you know, if we happen to win it, which I personally think we have a high chance of winning it. If we do win it, then, you know, we'll start building in, spring of 2022. So just to frame the timeline around, you know, the town, to give them an idea of how much time they would have to figure out logistics for moving location and you know, raise the awareness to the community, seniors lodge and such, just to give a timeline there.
Thank you, Mr. Savage. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. A really important point that I have mentioned in the past that I feel falls directly in line with speaking about capital dollars for the skate park, as well as falls in line with my earlier discussion on the Friends of Culture and Recreation Society and potential funding opportunities. One of the pieces that we miss as a community is the consultation with groups as they come through the community, such as the Trans Mountain Pipeline. When the Trans Mountain Pipeline went through Hinton, the Council of Hinton worked directly with Trans Mountain Pipeline, and they formed a community benefit agreement. And that community benefit agreement got $250,000 of investment dollars towards the Hinton Mountain Bike Park and Hinton Disc Golf Course. Because Parks Canada is the consulting body with Trans Mountain Pipeline, we miss these opportunities. We miss these opportunities as a community to engage these huge companies that move through our town. And they want to contribute, but we have no one seeking contributions. And there's no body right now that has that and is using that as a tool. So I would suggest, in line with the skate park and dollars needed for the skate park, possible dollars for a biking park in Jasper in the future, we need to note this community benefit agreement with Trans Mountain and with any other body that ever moves through our community. And we need to have our finger on the pulse of how do we access them, what tools, who in the organization is responsible for approaching them and looking for opportunities such as this.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have several points. First of all, I support the project proposal as presented by administration, and again, commend them on their good work. I have to remind Councillor McGrath that Trans Mountain did provide some money back in 2007 when they went through here in the national park, and they provided some equipment and some funding to redo the soccer pitch. However, because of I don't know, was poor planning, poor organizing, it was not very well done, and basically had to be redone. And that's why it was redone in the fashion that we got now, is an elevated platform, and it took out Ball Diamond A. So, you know, for us to go back to Trans Mountain, then I think I mean, it's possible, but that's the history. Several years ago, after the construction of the soccer pitch, Ball Diamond A became inoperable as a ball diamond. I asked a question at a rec board as to what plans they had for Ball Diamond A. They had no plans. So I'm delighted that something is being planned for that. And I'm delighted that there's some work that was done by operations to take down the unneeded equipment, some of it which was unsafe, especially during toboggan time. However, I would encourage operations to reuse the backstop to create the barrier between ball diamond B and C. I have mentioned that before. Lastly, that is a central facility. Recreation should be, I think, all done centrally. The $300,000 appears to be a lot of money, but in the scope of the recreation expenses budget that this community puts in, it's not. We subsidize recreation to the tune of 2.2 million this year, and it's projected to go to 3.4 million. The 300,000 is basically a one-time cost, one-time expense. These newly designed skate parks are low maintenance, and you know, I think it's more of a one-time expense. I would lastly request that in the design and the location of the skate park in Ball Diamond A, that they leave some room for the possibility of a winter facility such as a skating surface or the hockey rink. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. On the question of backstops, metaphorically speaking, I find it difficult to support the recommendation at this stage. I would much prefer to position council or reposition council as a funder of last resort and a backstop in that sense. To the extent that even at this stage, and even if it is just matching money, we signal our intent for whatever amount, and the $300,000, for example, that is in the recommendation. I agree with Councillor Butler that that works as a disincentive to anyone else that may have been thinking of donating to this project. And I don't deny that it's a good project. It'll be good for the community, but it'll be better, I think, if there is community ownership and community pride in its development rather than simply government largesse. And it is not just this project, it is how we position ourselves for future requests. If we position ourselves now as a funder of first resort, then I think we remove the likelihood that others will set about fundraising for worthy projects in the community. And so I am inclined to defer and give the Skatepark committee some assurance that they can certainly come back to us before it's grant funding time and let us know where things stand. And we can then signify our willingness to support in some amount. But to do it now, I think, has the likelihood of drying up additional fundraising. And that, in fact, may hurt the project, because as I understand it, and Mr. Savage can correct me, but as I read the material before us, the two foundations that have signified $100,000 each have, it seems to me that the condition there is that if the committee raises separately 200,000, then there is another 200,000 available. Does that include municipal money? I don't know. But do we in fact lessen the chances that those conditional funds are going to be available to the Skatepark committee by intervening in a way now that I think will disincentivize other people? And then there is the question from the taxpayer's perspective. If you're paying with your taxes, why would you pay out of your other pocket? And I'm concerned about that. So for those reasons, I am simply in a position where I would rather defer, wish them well with all of their fundraising, and come back to us when you know the final tallies, and we can then respond. But to become the funder of first resort, I think is an error on our part, and probably does more damage to this project in the short term and to our position with respect to bringing equity to the community in the long term. So I'm very uncomfortable. And then on the land use issue, I'm quite prepared to look at the change of venue, but I think that we have to do that in the context of some broad community consultation. And as Mr. Given said earlier, that would include comparison of relative costs and other matters, but the timeline is too short to consider making a firm decision for at least a few months. So my inclination is to defer all of it, but my position only. Councillor Butler.
Thanks for that, Mayor Ireland. You know, I absolutely see the point of what you're saying, and as one who expressed caution about, you know, open-ended commitments, I do see that point. My concern is that we've been dancing around this question now for several years, and I feel it is time to make a commitment. And I agree. I have concerns with the town and the tax base being seen as the funder of first resort. I also would like to see it, if not as the funder of last resort, is certainly not the first resort. But the problem is we're the funder of, only resort for so many recreation facilities. And I'm going back to what Councillor Janot mentioned. Nobody suggested that we look to the community to fundraise for new for the slab and boards. Nobody suggested that we go to the community for funding for the curling rink, where the curling rink had received, in fact, I think it was a CFAP grant, wasn't it? We just came up with the money. It is what councils have to do. And so I'm very concerned about placing the skate park committee in a position where they're between a rock and a hard place, that they think they're going to get some support, but maybe not, and it might be this amount or it might be that amount. I'm more comfortable putting a ceiling on it, but making the commitment. And one of the consequences of doing that is that we might get the fundraising ball going, and maybe more money is raised from the community, and maybe the skate park committee can come up with even more money and build an even better skate park. And I would love to see that happen, but I'm concerned with tap dancing. And so while I appreciate that sentiment as you've expressed it, I still feel it's best at one point to step up and say, okay, here's the maximum we're willing to commit, and then send them off to try to get this thing done. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Savage, perhaps concluding comments.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, I don't know if because I was kind of talking with Natasha there, but I don't know if it got updated, but the amount of money that we currently have is $109,000. Our committee with people that have invested in stuff. So potentially with that extra $200,000, even if it was only 109, so that would be putting us at like 220. So basically at this point, but if we did get an extra 200, that'd be 309. But anyways, putting it at that point, basically what we really need is we just need the commitment by June 15th. And I think, Richard, you were on point with that, and that's kind of what you were getting at. But from my committee standpoint, the concern of our members is really just getting the CFAP grant. That's all we're really, the land and everything else, we can figure that out later. And the size of the skate park. That's just closing. That's all I really want to say is, keeping the size and the level of the quality of the facility to the same standard, as well as securing the funding. There is concerns within our committee about the CFAP grant and the future of that. So we really want to make sure we capitalize on 2021's large stream CFAP grant. And like I said, I personally feel that we have a high chance of winning it. So I think, obviously we do want to plan for the worst, that we might not. I remain hopeful that with a good grant presentation, which I feel like we'll have a really strong grant application for this. I feel like we will be in the top tier of grant applications for 2021 for CFAP. So I think we're going to have a really high chance at winning this, especially seeing as these types of projects are highly prioritized at this time with COVID and everything, because they are so accessible. So I feel positive about that. But yeah, just the grant deadline is the main thing we're concerned about. And we really want to hit a home run with this grant this year. So that's all I really want to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Savage, and I apologize. My screen was frozen, so I may have missed part of that. I had to log out and back in again. However, I will then return to the agenda item and assume that we have exhausted the discussion. And I wonder whether there is a counselor sitting as a committee member who is prepared to make a motion that the committee recommend to council with respect to these two matters that are before us. Councillor Demota. Sorry, Councillor Demota, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm willing to move that forward. I'm just sorry. That was just, you were asking and I was raising my hand.
Understood. Thank you. All right, and so the motion from Councillor Demota is that Council of the Whole or Committee of the Whole recommend that Council approve up to $300,000 in matching funding for a new skate park, subject to matching funds being secured from external sources, and allocate a portion of the land commonly known as Diamond A in Centennial Park for construction of the skate park. The intent of the motion then is that it would be a recommendation from Committee of the Whole that would come back to Council for decision on February 2nd. Any debate? Councillor Demota.
I would like to amend that without the $300,000 in there. So I would like to make the recommendation that council consider funding with the deadline prior to June 15th or whenever the committee has a deadline, because I don't, or I can withdraw the motion because I'm not comfortable with committing $300,000. It doesn't make sense. I thought we discussed that. So I would just say that I should have written down the motion here. I would just put that motion forward without earmarking any funding. Hang on, I don't have
challenged. I am challenged to think then what would be before council for approval next week. Councillor Butler.
May I propose, because plenty of time has passed anyway, that we take a short comfort break and come back. It seems that Councillor Demota has in mind to create a different motion, but it seems also to me that it's going to be a pretty different direction than what we've discussed, and therefore we're going to be talking about that again. But a short 5-minute comfort break might be in order, so I'll just, it's a suggestion.
Yes, it is way past time. The discussion took longer than I had anticipated, but I didn't want to break it up earlier, but this is an opportune time. But it has been a long time coming and it is a difficult issue. So I'm going to suggest 10 minutes. So I will call recess. Those of you who wish can get busy during this 10 minutes, writing out the motion that you might be prepared to make. And we will reconvene then at 11:55. We are, all right. Hopefully somebody has spent some time crafting a motion, but before we get to that, Mr. Given.
Yes, Your Worship, I did not spend any time crafting a motion over the break, but I do have some information perspective from administration that might be helpful to council in considering the issue and crafting potential motions. Just want to make the observation that a part of the strategy that's presented in the report does foresee splitting the expense across 2 budget years to lessen the financial sort of impact, I guess, in any single budget year. If council defers decision-making on the issue to later in the year, it does impact administration's ability to utilize that strategy to spread the cost out over multiple years. So without entering debate, I will just make that observation that that would be a consequence of council choosing to defer the decision. Administration would lose the opportunity to spread that any contribution, or whatever amount it might be, across budget years, and would likely mean that the full amount would more likely to be reflected in 2022 rather than spread across those 2 years. So I just wanted to enter to provide that additional information for council about administration's strategy with respect to any potential funding that council might approve.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. Councillor Demota.
Well, if I'm going to withdraw anything that I was potentially going to motion, because I would like to have this as part of a reserve discussion for our budget consideration and not for a decision next week as a $300,000 or X amount contribution. Because I just want to remind council that for 2020, we went with a strict direction in reducing our tax requisition to the community. And with that, it was just under $800,000 that we were putting towards reserves. So if we consider $300,000 or 150 or whatever the amount is to split it up over whatever year, I don't think that this is the year to be having those discussions, particularly for large amounts like that. So I would like to see what kind of momentum the committee and community members can get going with the potential dollars that it could raise towards this initiative, and then see where council can come in with some type of allocation from reserves when the time is needed. I think that we're putting the buggy in front of the horse right now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So procedurally, you wish to withdraw the previous motion. And in the absence of objection from any councillor, I will permit that, because I want to leave it open for another councillor to make the motion if they choose. So is there objection to Councillor Demota? I see you, Councillor Keller-Hrampe, but firstly, is there objection to Councillor Demota withdrawing that motion? Councillor Keller-Hrampe?
Mayor Ireland, I would like to make the motion that we approve up to $300,000 for matching funds for the new skate park, subject to funding. Subject to funding, and to get some funding from external sources also, and also to consider a portion of the land commonly known as Diamond J in Centennial Park for the construction for discussion for the future.
Thank you, Councillor Keller-Hrampe. Can you just repeat the last phrase of that? Are you just repeating what is in the recommendation, or did you change that?
I changed it a little bit, rather than allocate a portion of the land, that we consider allocating.
Thank you. All right, I will trust that administration has the wording of that motion. And it is, again, just to recap earlier discussions, it is a motion made at committee to recommend to council. So council is not making a decision at this time. This is simply a recommendation coming from the committee of the whole, which council will consider at its next regular meeting, which is February 2nd. So we have the motion. Any further discussion on the motion? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Kelleher-Empey. I think that's a good motion, even in respect of some of the concerns that have been raised and that I have heard. And I share to some extent. And the first is with respect to your worship's concern about taking time on this and maybe deferring. And my point is that the fact that we ask that this come back on, what will it be, early February at a regular meeting doesn't mean we have to deal with it then. We can certainly defer. And I do understand that there might be reasons to defer. What we would be doing if we pass this motion here today is really just setting some direction. And I think that's really important here, because otherwise I'm concerned that we're going to be talking about this the day before the next election. I think we have to find some momentum here. I still think that we can both defer, and we have not committed ourselves to the maximum. We have just committed to a maximum. We haven't committed ourselves to spending the maximum. And then I also understand, of course, Councillor Demota's concerns around, is this the year? But we're putting a lot of money into recreation facilities, and we're borrowing a lot of it, much, much more than this. And so in determining that we would support a spend of this sort of magnitude, number one, it could come over 2 years. Number two, we haven't yet dealt with the question of overall, this would be a capital expenditure. Where's the money coming from for capital expenditures? We may have to borrow a little more money and pay for this over time. But I actually think that in particular, because of COVID, this is a really good time to be thinking about doing this. And we need to give sort of a go-ahead for the committee to apply for the CFAP grant. So I think it's a really good motion, and in fact does leave us plenty of latitude to respond to the concerns that I heard from Mayor Ireland and Councillor Demota. So I am in support, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland, and thank you, Councillor Kelleher-Empey, for making this motion and for making the amendment to the suggestion that you did. I am in full support of this. I would also be in full support of this by way of motion in a regular meeting, giving administration what they require to make sure that it is built into the 2021 capital plans and into the 2022 capital plans, and giving the community and the residents in our community assurance that we are moving forward with our skate park being created in Jasper, which is, as Councillor Butler suggested, so important, especially during the times of COVID-19, to have an accessible and outdoor place that is free to use for all people in the community.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. All right, I will simply say that I appreciate you making the motion, Councillor Kelleher-Empey. I will, in fact, support the motion, although I reserve certainly my obligation to give it full consideration for next week when it comes back before council. And I can see myself suggesting some nuance to both parts of the motion, but for the time being, I do agree that it is a matter that ought to come back at an early date for council, sitting as council, not as committee. And I appreciate that administration has got us to that point, and I thank them for that. So I will vote in favor, and we will continue the discussion with or without amendments. We'll see next week, but on with it, I think. And I do appreciate your comments, Mr. Given, related to the budget, and that is an important consideration to give the necessary direction to administration in a timely fashion. So thank you for that. If there is nothing else, then I will call the question. I won't try and repeat it, but it is to recommend to council approval of matching funds up to 300 and consider the allocation of different lands. All in favor? Councillor Demote, I could not see whether are you opposed? You are opposed. Well, I will call for that then. Those opposed, now you can put your hand up. Thank you. I wasn't sure whether it flashed by and I didn't see it. So there is one opposed, but that motion is carried. So that will be the recommendation of Committee of the Whole made to council on February 2nd. All right, that allows us to now advance.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, I just want to clarify again that I wasn't against the proposal for funding towards the skate park. I'm opposed to the up to amount considered. So that's all. Thank you.
Yeah. That is noted. Thank you. We can move to agenda item 7, policy and governance, public health update and concerns. We received the report earlier from Mr. Van Tighem on behalf of the Emergency Coordination Center. Is there any further discussion required by councillors about public health update and concerns? If not, I can move to agenda item 7.2, a standing item, council strategic priorities update, and the 2020-2022 business plan. Any discussion, questions from any member of council concerning those items? All right, well, now that we're skating right along, agenda item 8.1. Mr. Given, I presume a verbal report with respect to outdoor skating options.
Yes, Your Worship. Just a brief update. I appreciate we've had a long meeting already, but a brief update for council since we've last discussed the issue. As administration, we've identified at least 3 viable sites. There may be more, but at least 3 viable sites in the community, including Fireman's Park, Lions Park, and Robson Park. I think at this stage for this year, the preferred location would be Robson Park. We have considered some of the challenges with construction at this time of year, recognizing that we have frozen ground, and so a typical construction might have some kind of post that would go into the soil, which is frozen now, but there are methods to mitigate that, such as piling up snowbanks around the outside and using water on the inside, and so that's possible. And there are other designs that would be possible. We have reviewed with our insurance provider their view of outdoor rinks. A quote from the representative that I spoke to is, "This is Northern Alberta. Of course, we don't have a problem with outdoor rinks." But there are, that said, I don't mean to be flippant. That said, they did have recommendations for appropriate processes to mitigate risk. And so that's something that council should be aware of. Ultimately, we should be developing a council policy on outdoor rinks and administrative procedures for inspections. And that's something that can come down the line. I have had an initial conversation with the chair of the Volunteer Fire Brigade. He indicated that the members would be interested in supporting the establishment of an outdoor rink. And so not with it's not my position to overcommit them at this time, but they do at least have an interest in being able to support that kind of development. I also had a brief discussion with Tourism Jasper, and they may be able to provide some nominal financial support if required for some of the materials. But again, that's subject to confirmation. So all that to say that I think that we can absolutely move forward, and I think administration can do that within existing resources. I don't think there's a need for council to identify additional resources this year to be able to do something. I just want to be clear that even though we can move forward, we should I want to ensure that council has the right level of expectation and that the community through you has the right level of expectation for this year. We need to recognize that we're quite a ways through the winter season. My understanding from people around here is that Chinooks can start to happen as we get into that February, March, April. And so we need to recognize that starting earlier in the year would have been better. We may get limited use out of the any sort of ice skating surface this year. The size for this year would likely be small and would not probably, well, I will say, will not have boards. And so it wouldn't be a hockey style surface for this year. And that's really precluded by the build construction practices that we'd have to implement and timelines. But again, all that said, we can. I want to raise for council one consideration for you to make is about whether we should move ahead with it this year, recognizing those other complications, which are manageable, but really just the public health and COVID perspective, which I think maybe, we were all excited about the prospect of having a surface, but we need to recognize that in this year, it is actively creating a community gathering point where one didn't exist before. They do exist in many communities today in a COVID environment, and municipalities are managing use of the facilities, but it is a facility that doesn't exist today in Jasper. It is one that the community has a high degree of interest in, so it's likely to see some use when it's available. And so I just would want to raise that for council. Prior to administration undertaking the task of developing something, it's just that question of if we can for this year, which we can in a limited implementation, is that an action that council wants us to undertake, recognizing that either, just recognizing and expressing, I guess, the community sentiment about whether that is a wise idea in the COVID environment. It is outdoor active recreation, which we know is important for mental health and physical activity, especially today. But we do need to acknowledge that it is, by definition, a venue and facility that will attract people together in closer proximity than they would have come otherwise. So that, I think, is the most balanced perspective that I can give council. For here, I'm not looking, I don't think, for a motion, but if there was an indication from a majority of council that they wished administration to move ahead with implementing something this year, recognizing the limitations that would be in front of us, that's something council, or that's something administration could move forward with and would be prepared to do so. If council, on consideration of the other perspective, said, you know what, maybe let's have a more solid plan for next fall, where we could do the right kind of implementation, where we would be further through COVID and we could take some more time to get policies in place in advance, administration could do that as well. So just sort of leave it here for an indication from council, because administration, I think, can do either, and not necessarily requiring council motion, but I would like a clear expression of council's level of interest or general direction.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Councillor McGrath.
Well, firstly, thank you for listening to both council and to the residents of Jasper and their desire for an outdoor ice skating surface. I can't express enough gratitude. I'm very impressed to see this and to hear the way it's being presented. I'm happy that you have taken it upon yourself, Mr. Given, to go to who you've went to already to have this discussion in town. And the answer to your question, in my opinion, as one councillor, is yes. Yes, we should. We should, because we can responsibly manage it and professionally manage it. Adding an accessible ice surface is almost more important right now during COVID-19 than ever. The well-being of our residents and our children that don't otherwise have vehicles to reach the beautiful lakes around Jasper need this for their well-being. And we'll learn through this experience this winter. If we have an early spring and we lose the ice surface, we'll be grateful for the days and weeks that we had to experience it and to recreate on it. We'll learn through this experience as a pilot project in what to do better next year for possibly a full implementation next winter. So I am very grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Given, for your presentation on this. I am too overwhelmed by the possibility that we'll have something this year. Like you said, implement something for this coming year. I just appreciate, especially this year being under COVID. Let's start somewhere. There's a big learning curve in building outdoor ice surface. It's not quite as simple as it sounds. I speak from experience in a backyard rink. And if you watch the news at all in the Edmonton area where people built these this winter at the last minute, they'll tell you, you should have done it this way. There's a huge learning curve. But I'm so delighted to see that something can happen this year. We never know. We could get a lot of usage yet before spring comes around. So I thank you very much for this and encourage you to proceed ASAP. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Janot. Councillor Butler.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Givens, to you and your team. Mr. Given, I don't know why I always want to put an S on that. Mr. Given, thanks to you and your team for your willingness to sort of just make it happen. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you bringing up the question of gathering place. It is a concern. There's no doubt. And I have no doubt that some will feel that we shouldn't be doing this for that exact reason. But my observation would be I have opportunity constantly to watch what's going on at the Centennial Park Toboggan Hill, and there's a lot of gathering there. A lot of kids are using it all the time, and it's great. It's so fun to see. I have fun just watching those kids have fun, and it will be mostly kids using this rink, I think. So my observation is that it seems to be manageable in that respect, and would be a pretty similar kind of gathering that would likely be happening on an outdoor rink. So I think we could eliminate risk, or we could eliminate the addition of any COVID risk by just not doing it. But I don't think that would be at heart the best for the community. So I appreciate you bringing up that concern, and it's sort of noted, but I still think we should go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Keller-Franti.
Thank you, Mr. Given. I think it's great. I think we should go ahead. Like Councillor Butler, I know COVID has concerns, but you know, all these children go to park, they're responsible. They go to tobogganing, they're responsible. The parents are responsible. I think we should just go do it. I think it'll be a great addition. It would be great for all the new Canadians to learn to skate. I think it's awesome.
Thank you for that. Any further comments? Councillor Demota?
No comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Given, I endorse what's been said by other councillors. I think it's an opportunity that we should take advantage of. My one concern from an operational perspective relates to the fact that, as has been mentioned by yourself and Councillor Butler, we are creating a gathering point, and I'm prepared to accept that there might be some downside to that, but overall I support moving forward. But I wonder what has been considered in terms of the regulatory regime under which skating will take place. I mean, I don't want to get into the details about how large a space and how many people per square centimeter on the ice surface, but would there be an intent to sign it for maximum usage, and would there be an intent to have any sort of monitoring or enforcement? I appreciate that, as Councillor Butler indicated, we probably don't worry too much about enforcing gathering at the Toboggan Hill, but this is perhaps slightly different and an invitation, I think, to visitors as well. So I would just be comforted to know that there is some sort of monitoring compliance plan in place, or will be at least before the ice freezes.
Yes, Your Worship. There is, administration's considered a couple of different models. We do have to think about available resources. We don't have the culture and rec staff that maybe we would have had in the past in terms of programmers to be able to provide active on-site management and oversight. And I don't know any community that has a rink attendant at outdoor rinks. It just is so labor intensive. there is the potential that we could have some booked time. Ms. McNabb has informed me that we could potentially have times available to the community to book through the recreation system that we have today. I'm not sure, you know, again, for a limited implementation this year, whether that's practical. I think what we would do to ensure that the municipality is clearly stating what the expectation is for the community, and to be clear, you know, mitigating risk for the municipality is having on-site signage, posting the current public health orders from the province of Alberta about external gatherings, outside gatherings, and reminding people of what their responsibility is under those current public health orders, and also where people can report concerns about the condition of the ice, the surface, or about public gatherings in general, so that if there is something that users observe or the community observes, that they can bring that to the municipality's attention for an opportunity for us to address it. So, you know, I would say that it likely won't be active management on site at all times. I think that's just impractical. But we would count on the users and Jasperites to ensure that they're behaving responsibly, and we would ensure that there's appropriate information available at the site so they can understand what their obligations are.
Thank you very much for that. So with that, I think if it is not unanimous, I certainly heard no objection to it. So there is overwhelming support from council that you move forward with that. So thank you again for bringing it forward, and we look forward to seeing an ice surface out there on Robson Park once that can be physically arranged. So thank you very much for that. Agenda item 9, we have a request for a letter of support. I noticed earlier in the day that Ms. Robbins had attended. I'm not sure whether she wished to speak to this. Councillor Keller-Hrampe, you may know more as a representative on Community Futures West Yellowhead, although we can just deal with the letter as a letter. It's fairly self-explanatory. But if you wish to speak to it, or I see Ms. Robbins is there on my screen. She has been promoted, I suppose, to join the group, and I see her there. So if councillors have questions, Ms. Robbins is there there she is, to answer questions or to further expand on the request. Firstly, are there questions from councillors? Or Nancy, if you wish to speak, just unmute and I will invite you to do so, but don't feel pressure to do so. But I see that you have unmuted, so go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Community Futures West Yellowhead is applying for a year-long program called Choose West Yellowhead. We're hoping to work a little bit on the theme of shop local, but to take it and really work on doing more than getting people to invest their dollars locally. We want to expand it and really talk about the culture of what it means to invest your money that you have locally through procurement, through eating locally, to recreating locally, to as well as shopping. So we have big plans. If our grant goes ahead, we want to focus by industry in the region, and we want to talk to people about why they should choose West Yellowhead. And also at the same time, help our businesses in that we want to feature them throughout the year, and also help them develop ways that they can appeal more to local dollars and to have people be better customers and work more with their business. So that's the hope. We're looking for a letter of support to go with our grant for from the municipality of Jasper, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you for that. Councillor Keller-Hrampe.
Thanks, Nancy. As Jasper is 1/5 owner of Community Futures, have our other partners all submitted letters, Nancy?
We should have everybody, all 5 municipalities, if you agree today, we should have letters by the end of the week, yes.
Thank
And we
you.
also have some businesses that have also chosen to support us, as well as some community groups. And as well, we have the local chambers as well that have written letters of support.
I think it is important that we support this initiative through Community Futures. I would like council to write a letter in support.
Thank you, Councillor Kelleher-Renty. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Robbins, for having this on our agenda today. I, as a small business owner, absolutely understand and agree with the importance of this project. And I thank you for having this before us, and I absolutely agree to this.
Any other questions or comments by councillor? Any councillors? I have, I see a thumbs up. Thank you, Councillor Butler. I have only one question, Ms. Robbins, if you could provide to our administration the recipient of the letter that we might send in support. You've indicated that you're applying for a grant, but it's unclear to me to whom you are applying. So if we are to send a letter, I just need those coordinates, and we can, it appears that there is consensus that we should do so, and I'm happy to get that done. I just need to know who gets it. So if you
Sure,
can provide.
it's Community Futures Pan West, and it's the Rural Opportunities Fund.
Thank you for that. All right, the suggestion from Councillor Kelleher-Renty is that we do provide such a letter of support, and in the absence of objection from council, I will work with administration to get that letter out the door. And I see no one indicating opposition to that, so that shall be done. Thank you very much, Ms. Robbins. And it was a long wait to get to that, but thank you for sticking with us this long. All right, that then takes us to agenda item, where are we up to 9? 10, other new business. Nothing had been indicated, but Councillor Demoda, I want to return to you. You raised earlier, and I apologize for cutting you off, but said you would have another opportunity. And so if there is any part of that discussion that you think is still outstanding with respect to council proceeding with a review of councillor remuneration prior to the next election, we should get on with that, but this is an opportunity for you to speak to that again. Councillor Kelleher-Renty indicated that that is to some extent in the hands of the Human Resources Committee now to come back to us.
Aye, Captain, and I appreciate that Councillor Kelleher-Renty had said all that she said and direct and to the point and concise. So we'll go down that road, and that's what we need to do. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. If there is no other new business, agenda item 11 is correspondence. We've dealt with the one piece of correspondence that we had specific to Community Futures West Yellowhead. So there is nothing else for council consideration or information at this time, which takes us to agenda item 12, council representation on various boards, upcoming meetings. Typically here, if there are meetings upcoming where our representative is challenged with a position that they ought to be taking. So is there anything that needs addressing in that regard for any councillors engaged in upcoming meetings on various boards or committees? I see nothing. I'm sorry, Councillor Kelleher-Renty.
Just under this, Mayor Arden, it's not that I need any help with anything, but Community Futures West Yellowhead, we have some business coaching available. Many of our businesses here in Jasper and our region are suffering right now. They also have a lot of, they have some mental health issues within their business, and we have business coaching available that is of no cost to these businesses if they want to reach out to the Community Futures office in Hinton.
Thank you for that. Councillor Demota.
Well, I don't want to get ahead of myself if you were going to bring up anything regarding the Economic Recovery Task Force, but I was just wondering personally, as a councillor, if you had any feedback from any of the agencies involved on what's come forward with our proposed budget or budget considerations. Having the representation on there, has anyone or any parties voiced any concern about what we've been talking about or what could be considered? I know it's hard for certain groups to take positions on it, but I'm just wondering if you had any, if anybody had contributed to the conversation.
Thank you for that. To the best of my recollection, no, that has not been a focus of the Economic Recovery Task Force. Generally speaking, all things impacting business and the economy are discussed in a general sense. And I was happy to have Mr. Given join the Economic Recovery Task Force discussions. Last week was our last meeting, Wednesday of last week, and he will continue, I think, to be engaged in that and to the benefit of all, I think. It's good to have him there. But in terms of the budget itself, I do not recollect that that was a specific topic of discussion, nor is it really likely to be, although it could come up, and it's fairly wide-ranging discussion that we have at that task force. So anything could come up, but it has not yet been a topic of specific discussion.
Well, considering what we went through last year, as council, and with the public engagement that we did have, and some of the decisions that were made, I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity for some type of engagement, and whether through the task force itself or outside of that, if council was willing to consider some type of broader discussion on what we need to look at going forward.
It is something that could be discussed at any number of committees, I presume, and I don't want to get ahead of the task force. I am hopeful that the task force will be coming forward with a recommendation to council, not specific to the budget though, but generally to economic preparedness for the future of our community. But as I say, I don't want to get in front of that task force or be seen to be directing it in any sense. So I leave it to that. And I mean, it is always open to any organization or individual in the community to contact council with respect to views on the unfolding budget.
Thank you.
If there is nothing else on agenda item 12, a reminder that in about an hour's time, we have an intergovernmental meeting with Parks Canada. Do we have a separate link? I will have to check my emails, but we have a link for that for later today. Thank you.
Yes, Your Worship, there is a WebEx meeting invitation, I believe, that was sent to council, and so it will be on a different platform, but I believe that should have been circulated to council members, and it should be in the calendars.
I do recall now having seen WebEx rather than Zoom, which is also a great platform. I've used it before. All right, then we do have a scheduled in-camera personnel matter with our CAO. We are running short of time before we move in camera. It is fully anticipated that when we come back into open session, we will simply adjourn. There will be nothing arising from the in-camera session that will change anything that, well, it's committee of the whole in any event, so we won't be making any further decisions. So for those members of the public who have stuck with us for the last 3 hours, I thank you. I commend you for your patience and your resilience. I invite you back at our next meeting, 9:30 next week, February 2nd, for our regular council meeting. But you have done all you can do today to be with us, and I will invite a motion that council move in camera at this time. And once we get there, we can discuss how long we want to devote to this personnel matter, given that there are other needs that we have and an upcoming meeting at 1:30. But that we can discuss with Mr. Gibbon. So a motion to move in camera at 12:36. Can I have that from Councillor Kelleher-Empey? Thank you. All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you. There are none opposed. So thank you all again. We can stay. Are we staying on? I don't see that we have another link.
I believe Ms. Byrne has emailed out another link to council. It
Okay.
should be in your email inbox. So we'll just take that one moment. And I guess just for the record, I'll report that this is council and I'll be the only member of administration that's going into that in-camera session. Just a matter of disclosure. And as the mayor reported, I will report back to administration for the minutes about who makes the motions to adjourn and to come out of camera. And we will see you all on the other Zoom link.
Great. Thank you all. And once again, thanks to all those members of the public for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.